Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good morning to the West Coast, good afternoon to the East Coast, and good evening to Palestine. صباح الخير, مساء الخير, مساء النور. We welcome you here on the 10th anniversary of the Indigenous Women of Color Feminist Delegation that was the first and continues to be the only to Palestine. I acknowledge that my university, San Francisco State University, sits on indigenous, stolen, colonial land that must be resisted, that must be reclaimed in the same manner as people in Palestine are fighting to reclaim their narrative, fighting to liberate their land, and people around the world are doing so. I cede to my colleague, my sister, my comrade, Wazia Tawan, who was member of the delegation, who will offer the land acknowledgement in a proper manner from the indigenous people of these lands.
Hamidakyapi, Awas Inchanta Washtayanapa Chiuzapiet. Hello, my relatives. It's with a good heart that I greet all of you with a handshake. And I'm going to offer a land acknowledgement. This is my first time doing so virtually where people are all over. So I'm doing it a little bit differently. But I'm joining you from the Dakota homeland of Minnesota, Makoche, or land where the waters reflect the skies. And this is a place where my ancestors experienced genocide, ethnic cleansing, concentration camp imprisonment, and land dispossession. The vast majority of my people still live in exile, and our homeland has faced more than 2 centuries of constant exploitation and destruction. And that's the sinister side of settler colonialism. For settlers to colonize land, the people living there must be killed or removed or subjugated. It's a violent, life-destroying process. The dispossessed and the ones living under colonial occupation, both the human and our non-human relatives, face a painful existence. It's an existence in which the occupying power imposes its language, its names, its stories, its systems, its institutions, and enforces all these through its laws and military. But one thing I've learned, both through the indigenous struggles here in the US and through our Palestinian relatives, is that we will never give up our fight to recover our homelands. So today, in this land acknowledgement, I want to celebrate the determination and courage of all people living under settler colonial rule. The people who never forget that the land is ours, who fiercely tell our truths, who relay our memories and stories to the next generation to continue the struggle, and who will use whatever means are necessary to fight back. The land remembers us. It remembers our language, our songs, our prayers, our blood, our sweat, and our tears. We belong to the land, and the land belongs to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sister, comrade, relation who was part of the delegation. I also want to follow with saluting and honoring all those who have fallen in the struggle for justice, freedom, dignity, and liberation, starting from the lands here in North America and the uprisings that have been going on here for Black freedom, Black liberation, for indigenous people of color lives, for the freedom of women, queer, gender, non-binary folks, for environmental justice, for fair wages for all, for justice and freedom for all, to the uprisings that have been going on in Palestine. And we will be discussing them as we go along. We will not be able to have any grounding if we do not ground ourselves in our people's experiences and the experiences of the struggle as we produce knowledge for justice. I want to start with many thank yous, a lot of gratitude to go around. I want to start with the people who are making this possible. First, the people behind the scenes Salim Shahade, who is a graduate student, doctoral student at UCLA, studying and researching Palestinian student organizing in the United States, especially the General Union of Palestine Students, who was an MA student in the Ahmed Studies at San Francisco State University, and a student with Students for Justice in Palestine, and who is also a very big part of the team of Teaching Palestine, Pedagogical Praxis and the Indivisibility of Justice. Been involved in conceptualizing, planning, and the execution of this event, even though we don't see Salim on the screen, he's behind. The other person here with us is David Shank, who is from the People's Forum and who is also helping us with the tech support and also involved in immigrant rights struggles. And he is part of the team along with Layan Flurhan, who is today traveling actually in Venezuela, not in the US, but who has been the person who has working with us from the People's Forum to make this possible. And aside from the fact that we love to collaborate with the People's Forum, part of the reason this is being streamed live for the People's Forum is because Facebook has taken down, completely deleted the Ahmed Studies, the Arab and Muslim Ethnicity and Diaspora Studies Facebook page completely. Has been an ongoing campaign by the Zionist white supremacists and their right-wing allies since 2013. They've been trying to take down Ahmed Facebook page, and they shut it down. We're fighting, and we want to share with everybody the link. The Jewish Voice for Peace actually has launched a campaign to reinstate the Ahmed Facebook page. However, in the absence of having the Facebook page, we sought temporary refuge, just like refugees who get expelled from their lands and seek temporary refuge and live in refugee camps. They are there temporarily, they will return, and we want to be able, in a symbolic way, have Ahmed Facebook page down. I want to thank particularly Hallie Soloway from Jewish Voice for Peace Westchester, who actually has been very helpful in working with JVP on this petition, as well as even went around and looked up the photos of the delegation members and accumulated them for us to be able to do the flyer here today. I want to thank Professor Raspichowski, who has been also extremely active, Genius Award MacArthur winner, who has been very active in this campaign and many other campaigns, and who actually spoke to the People's Forum to make it possible for us to do this. If it hadn't been for the two of them, probably we might not have been here today. I would like to thank Daisy Diamond, a young anti-Zionist Jewish activist who actually designed the flyer, and she's working free of charge and volunteering all the time and keeps revising again and again. I want to thank Ahmed graduate student volunteer Layth Ulum, who along with the undergraduate student assistant Asma Khuja helped me with the syllabi for the 2 summer courses that have been canceled by San Francisco State. They have been blocked. We can show you the images of the 2 courses. One was Intro to Arab and Muslim Studies, and the other one was Islamophobia. We actually asked for another course on Palestine, given the situation, but those were blocked too. Might not be the time to discuss it here. I also want to thank the current interns who are coming to work with us on Teaching Palestine, Hidayah, Asma, and Jade. I would like to also say that this event is being streamed live now by several of our co-sponsors, American Muslims for Palestine, Eyewitness Palestine, Muwatin Institute for Democracy and Human Rights at Birzeit University in Palestine, National Students for Justice in Palestine, Palestine Youth Movement, the International Campaign to Defend Professor Abdel Hadi, and on YouTube, the People's Forum, as well as Muwatin Institute for Democracy and Human Rights at Birzeit University. Other co-sponsors of this event include Eyewitness Palestine, Jewish Voice for Peace Boston, National Black Education Agenda, Northern California Friends of Sabil, Palestinian Feminist Collective, the Center for Development Studies at Birzeit University in Palestine, the U.S. Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, and Women in Black Union Square. And I should say that the reason that we actually have, it's an amazing list, but also the reason we don't actually have a larger list is because of capacity issues. I want to also now thank my colleagues, my sister comrades who are on the delegation, and we will continue doing so as we go along. Don't want to speak for any of you, But I also want to thank Najah National University in particular that hosted us, that provided all sorts of support, including coordinated and organizing by Ala Abu Dhair, the coordinator for the Zajil Youth Project, as well as the public relations at Al-Najah, and as well as the administration of Al-Najah. I want to thank Zakaria Ode, who helped us coordinate multiple activities outside in Ramallah, in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, Dheishe, as well as in the 48 areas. And I want to thank Salem Hantouli of Al Yasmin Hotel, who actually also helped with the coordination of many other things, and everybody in Palestine who helped us, who welcomed us, not only welcomed us, but also helped organize. And you will see as we go along how many people have been actually involved in making this a possibility. Today is the 10th anniversary of our last day in Palestine. We returned on the 20, we left on the 23rd of June, 2011. We issued our statement on July 13th. We are going to be having another event at that time with many of the Palestinian hosts as well as members of the delegation. And we have been doing a lot of stuff ever since. So this event is to actually talk about our experiences, to assess the impact of what we have done, and to think through why is it we need delegations. And I should say in this instance that one of our co-partners is Eyewitness Palestine, has been engaged in sending delegations to Palestine and has been doing the delegations virtually now and will be resuming in the fall in-person delegations. And we hope to collaborate on delegation and study abroad in Palestine that we have been planning all along. So what we will do today, we are going to begin with a slideshow showing members, which we are very thankful to Dr. Melissa Garcia, who put it together. She is Dr. Melissa Garcia now. At the time, she was Melissa Garcia, graduate at Yale University. And what we are going to do, we're going to deal with three sets of questions. The first question will be, what are some of the experiences we can reflect upon? What were their significance? Why did we think these experiences left impression on each of us? And what does it resonate with the experiences we have here? The second set of questions will be, what impact do we believe the delegation has had? And to assess our own, basically issue a report card for our own work. And why the delegation? What's the significance of an indigenous, a woman of color specific feminist delegation? So we may jump back and forth. Bear with us. This is dynamic. This is spontaneous. This is organic. This is the first time actually in 10 years that all of us come together virtually here. We've met at National Women's Studies Associations a couple of times in Puerto Rico in 2014, at the National Women's Studies Association conference in 2015 in Milwaukee, where NWSA passed its historic statement, resolution on Palestine adopted, and the support for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. I'm not going to talk about it more because everybody else. So I would like to turn it over to Melissa to start the slideshow, and then we will be interrupting each other. We will be jumping in, and you can see maybe one image of on the screen would just show all the members of the delegation. We actually have almost every single member of the delegation except Ayoka Shinzara, who is now actually recording, so she couldn't change her scheduling, but everybody else is on the delegation. And we will also share with you the list of the delegation that we have shared with Palestine. So without further ado, I turn it over to Melissa. Are we having technical difficulties? We can't hear you. You're muted.
No, it's just that my computer is a little bit slow, so it's uploading. But should be. Okay. Oh, okay. So, sorry.
Melissa, I'm going to have to ask members to kind of just say hello. Okay. So Angela,
Yeah.
if you would like, just come on the screen, say hello. Angela, please unmute yourself. If you don't
mind. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said, Rabab.
I was just saying, if you could, just have your face on the screen, introduce you. We're going alphabetically by first name, by the way.
I see. So you'd like me to begin by responding to the question?
Yeah, just say hi. No, if you just say hello, so everybody, we can have everybody's picture alone on the screen, and then the question will be with the slideshow. Go ahead.
Yeah, hello everyone. It's really wonderful that we're able to come back together on the 10th anniversary of our historic visit to Palestine. And I'm very much looking forward to the slideshow that Melissa has prepared. And it looks as if she may be almost ready. Am I right, Melissa? Good.
Yes.
All right. So then people can introduce themselves when they speak. Okay, go ahead, Melissa.
Okay, so okay, it's asking me. All right, so share. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
I think I got it. Oh. Can you see the screen right now? All right. So I put together these images as a way for us to give you the visual repertoire of some of the activities that we did. We, among ourselves, we collected so many images because it was the first time that we were all there, with the exception of Rabab. But the idea was that we were having new eyes to everything, but at the same time, we were documenting all the material, the information, the experiences, right? So sometimes when we take images, we take them for admiring, we take them for, making them large. But this time I noticed when I was reviewing all these photographs, we were really documenting what we were seeing. So what I have here, and I wanted to just play in the background as somebody, as I think Rabab is gonna be giving us a little bit of the overview. Am I right, Rabab? Okay, well, so some of the images that I have here, as I said, were just some of the places that we went. So because I'm going to be talking a little bit about a huerta, I just decided to start with this, which was also the first day that we arrived, and we all went together to the village of a huerta on that evening. Right, so here there are some photographs when we were meeting with the council first in the building, and then when we were basically, as you can see, meeting with the town, right? Look at the children. And then some of the images that you see here, perhaps other members of the delegation, once you are seeing what you see here, you know, your memory is gonna be, shared. And if when you are talking about something, I'm going to be able to pull an image, if we have it, that speaks to the particular event, the particular experience that you want to share with everybody else. So for instance, this night here, as you can see, we arrived late in the afternoon. And then in this photograph on the bottom left, it was getting dark already. We were on our way back, right? So this is a child that we met. And as I wrote it there, the huerta child who was terrorized by settlers, and I talked a little bit about that, right? And then after that, I have some images of some of the key places that we went to, right? That was the next day when we had meeting and breakfast with some Palestinian activists, and the wall, and then we have photographs of the settlements, the checkpoints, the wall, and some of us are there too. But as you can see, the wall on the other side, right? The various manifestations of the wall. And then when we met also, right, with this, these prisoners here, that we had like this conversation on the very same day that we were touring the whole Jerusalem, Old City. And as I said, I'm not going to go through each photograph because there are just so many, but I just wanted to give you an idea of the kinds of visuals that we were able to collect at the various places and with the various people that we met, right? As you can see here, Angela is being interviewed. I mean, I'm not going to go into detail, but that's why I wanted to just give a general framework of the kind of activities that we had and the kinds of interactions that we experienced while we were there. And I'm going to just start with sharing my own experience with at the beginning with a huerta. So as everybody else participates, I'm going to be pulling up more photographs depending on what people are sharing, okay? So as you can see, this is just like a bit of that day. Oh, I think I'm going back. But so let me just go back to the first one. So what I wanted to share with everybody else here is something that happened that day. As I said, it was the first day that we spent, and we learned about all the acts of terror that settlers and the Israeli military were infringing upon people who lived in a huerta. And it was not an abstract thing. It was something very concrete. So concrete as to have like a door, right, of a house, when they were showing us the places where the bullets have been, damaging the wall. Why? Because of these constant acts of terror, right? These are just ordinary people living here. And there are so many of those, right? Like trying to dismantle the infrastructure that allows the villagers to have water, for instance, right? Or the very fact that people are just, walking up in the middle of the night, and the fear that you have when you answer, and the kinds of things that can happen. But we heard from so many people, as you can see here, right? There were many people. We heard various types of problems. There is that tank water. There is a reason for that, right? But as you can see, it was a communal bearing witness to the very immediate, concrete experiences, right, of settlers doing the everyday, ordinary act of terrorizing the population here. And I don't have an image of the woman who I heard, who was, as she was telling us the story, she was embracing her children and telling us, right, a horrific night that she had, and that explaining all this, the suffering and the horror, really, right, of not being calm in your own home. But for me, 10 years, and as I've been revising these photos and my notes, it's still very vivid in my memory 10 years after that. And it's something that, and here I'm going to make the link with everything that we have put together for today. It's how a very key moment when I met this woman who was telling us via translator, right? She was telling us all these things that were happening, but there was something about her body language. There was something about, as she was telling us the story via translation, hugging their children, right? And then not letting us go. Basically, we were like, okay, we were in a delegation, so we have to move to the next aspect, right? But the desperation, and that what the woman was saying to us was, please tell this story. Please tell this story, right? And how many times can you repeat that? But again, it's not a semantic thing that really caught my attention. It was everything. It was her whole existence, her whole body, her family. We were at her house, right? So even as everybody was leaving, she will not stop. And the reason why I bring her is not because of her individual as such, right? But like the many women and the many people who are like that, right? Who are, actively resisting. A very humble woman from her very humble home. She sees the situation, sees these people who are coming from the United States, and she's giving it her best. Right? And she's like begging us. And for me, that's feminism, right? For me, that is, the resistance, the trying to see the conditions around you and make your point. And she would say, do not forget, do not forget. She has shaped not only the things that I teach, right? She has shaped not only my frameworks to analyze what counts as activism and what doesn't, right? She has forced me to expand my frameworks, right, of how people live their ordinary lives, right? But also raise to the very somehow extraordinary occasions, right? Like this, because their life is at stake. And so I wanted just to put that up, right? How, yes, it's Palestine, yes, it's this woman, it's a Huerta, but it has broader connotations, right? For peoples living under occupation in Palestine and elsewhere. And I'll stop right there.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Next, we are going to be hearing from Professor Barbara Ransby. So please go ahead.
Yeah, I guess we're just, offering our reflections. First of all, it's wonderful to see all my sisters. It was such a powerful and pivotal experience to go to Palestine with all of you, and I think we've all felt the reverberations of that intervention that we made. And thank you, Rabab, for reconvening us, and for all the folks who've made it possible. And just seeing those few images, Melissa, really brought back memories. I guess I'll say 3 or 4 things that I remember, and I'll be brief because there's a lot of us, fortunately. I think what resonated for me on the trip was the uniqueness of the situation there, and also the common ground and the common struggle that we shared. Those of us who work primarily in the Black freedom movement in this country have, had a long-standing commitment to self-determination in Palestine. And I think back to the, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's 1967 statement, the Black Panther Party statement, the Movement for Black Lives statement, for which they caught a lot of flack, in solidarity with Palestine and Palestinian solidarity for the Black struggle here. And so there was a familiarity among the people that we spoke to, about the struggles in the United States against various forms of oppression, settler colonialism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and so forth. And of course, the similarities to the situation in South Africa as we looked at a real apartheid regime in that region. Many of us were very close, to the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. And so we saw the resonation between the two. The other thing I'll mention was something that wasn't on our official itinerary, but really affected me very profoundly and joyfully, and young people who I've continued to be in community with, is when we met with Queers for BDS, young LGBTQ activists in Palestine, struggling against issues of homophobia in the movement, but clear about what the lines of demarcation were, in terms of fighting settler colonialism and apartheid in the region. They were, fierce and smart and optimistic and just, really kind of a hopeful force in all of that. So that, and they were unapologetically critical on many levels of all aspects, right, of what was going on, including willingness to struggle, inside the movement. And I think that's something that we can all learn from. The other image that comes to mind, when I think of that trip, and I don't know if Melissa has any more images of this, was the profound, violent imposition of that wall. We talk about divisions and we talk about Jim Crow and we talk about segregation, but just the mammoth, fierceness and ferociousness of that wall, cutting people off from their lands in some cases, cutting them off from family and friends, creating a barrier to jobs that people had to go to hospitals that people needed to go to. And then there was a part of the wall that we were taken to where there were murals and solidarity statements and all kinds of forms of creative artistic resistance put on that wall, to say, this will not stop us. We are not afraid, and solidarity statements from all over the world. And that also, in the middle of that very oppressive situation, that very repressive situation, that very violent situation, there was the determination of resistance, and there was solidarity and so forth. And then the final thing I'll say is around our visit to Sheikh Jarrah, which, of course, has been in the news recently. And we should also speak to the current situation because we're remembering 10 years ago, but we don't have to go back 10 years to talk about the need to speak out in solidarity with Palestine, the bombings of Gaza, what is going on there now, the repression against people in this country who dare to speak out. I'm thinking, of course, of, most recently Cynthia Young at Penn State, but, Pal Legal has documented so many cases of retribution against people who dare to speak out in solidarity with Palestine. But Sheikh Jarrah was the situation, of course, where Palestinian family had a settler family in their front yard that had just taken over a portion of their home. And there was such close proximity. It just, you think of apartheid and separateness as people have no contact, but just like, in the system of chattel slavery in this country, where there was both physical intimacy and violent dehumanization right at the same, point of interaction. And the fact that those people kept their dignity, their humanity, their commitment to resistance intact in the face of daily, momentary, moment to moment assaults on that dignity was really inspiring, and how generous they were to us, living with this determination to not give up their land, despite the fact that the occupation was literally in their front yard. So those are some of my memories and reflections, and of course we'll get to more of a political discussion of the significance of this delegation and significance of Palestine in our collective, both political commitments and imaginations in terms of what we hope for the world and for the larger struggle that we're all involved in. But those are some of my initial reflections.
Thank you, Barbara. And I remember that we were also at the NWSA, and you have raised that we should actually. I remember after the delegation, you actually came to the conference before in Cincinnati, before Puerto Rico, and you said we really need to push for around BDS and so on. There's a lot of members. I'm not going to take more time, but I want to actually turn it over now to Beverly, and then we are going to be playing it by ear. Anybody can jump in, so I'm just basically managing traffic. Go ahead, Beverly. And I want to just say that Beverly, unmute while you're unmuting. Beverly has, and she knows I say this all the time, had a very important role in what I call the browning of NWSA, which also was one of the contributing factors to what we did, the delegation, and also where we're at now as many more members. So please, Beverly, go ahead.
Thank you, Rabab. And I want to remember, too, that we got this idea going actually at an NWSA gathering. I want to thank you, Rabab, for getting us together remotely today, and we will certainly get together in person later. I want to add something to Barbara's Sheikh Jarrah's statement that I remember in addition to what she described, and that is that those Jewish settler children, I think boys who were at the front of the door, taunted the delegation, and said probably nasty things to us as we were, going to the back of the house to meet with the Palestinian family. And one of them was a grandmother whom I think had been dispossessed of her home, going back, of course, to 1948. So I wanted to just remember that. There are two things in particular that I want to remember. One is the resilience and the dignity that Barbara described of people in struggle, the just absolute unwillingness to give up or to see themselves as victims or to whine. I was just really struck by the strength and the resilience. Another thing that I was really struck by was the deep connections that Palestinians in struggle feel with the Black struggle in the U.S. And I want to say this not because Angela is here, but to say that they knew Angela, they revered Angela, and they remembered Angela's struggle. And I was very struck by that personal political connection that she may say something about. And one of the ways to me that connection between Black struggle in the U.S. and Palestinian struggle there was manifest in ways that I think almost made some of us cry was that we were at a gathering and we ended up singing together, "We Shall Overcome." That sticks in my mind forever. And then finally, the other thing that struck in my mind and reminded me of the 60s was when we were on a bus together and we were stopped to be, looked at to make sure that we weren't doing I don't know what. And German Shepherd dogs were brought onto the bus. And it reminded me of the German Shepherd dogs that sit-inners and freedom riders faced in the U.S. in the 60s. And so that was a point of connection between us in the U.S. in the 60s and the continuing Palestinian struggle there. So I'll stop right there.
Thank you so much, Beverly. I wanted to actually, the name of the woman we've met in Sheikh Jarrah is Nabil al-Kurd. Rifqa al-Kurd. She passed away this past year. Two of her grandchildren, Muna and Muhammad, are now the ones who are tweeting, getting arrested, getting imprisoned, getting shut down by the Israelis in the same home. And their father, Nabil, is actually one of the people who told us the story there. I also want to say, I mean, I'll speak a little bit more about that we shall overcome, because I was hoping maybe, I'm not sure if who would like to go next. Is it, do you, Angela, do you want to speak, or do you?
You asked me if I would.
Chandra, okay, Chandra, and I was wondering if you can also say a little bit about the Jalamet checkpoint, because also Beverly brought up the German Shepherd, remember? And remember the booklet that was in,
Yeah. So, so again, it's absolutely fabulous to be with everyone here today. Thank you for organizing, Rabab. Thank you to everyone who co-sponsored this, and to my sisters and comrades who were with me on this delegation. It just was, as everyone has said, I think, completely life transforming for me. And I don't use those words very often, in fact. So let me think. There are so many things I could talk about, the very concrete experiences. But in general, I would say there are two things that I was struck by and that I carried with me over the last 10 years and hopefully further on. One is the kind of the communities that we met at all levels, right? In the village of Awata, in Nablus, in Jerusalem, in Silvan, I mean, and also in the universities. So Birzeit and Najah. Also, I'm remembering the meeting we had with Barghouti and the BDS folks in Jerusalem. So all of these, and also the feminist meeting in Haifa, all of these together provided a kind of really deep analysis of the connections between settler colonialism and apartheid and racism, sexism, misogyny, all of the kinds of structures that I, as an academic, an intellectual, and a political person, have been working on and thinking about my entire life. And there was a level of deep, deep, deep understanding and analysis grounded in experience, right? Which was incredibly compelling and which made it possible to see the kind of continuities between Palestine and, of course, liberation struggles all over the world. And for me, it was really significant as someone who's part of a post-colonial generation in India, who has been thinking and heard stories and memories of people in freedom struggles for a long time. And I was able to connect, I believe, with that aspect of being Indian, right? And being a feminist of color in the US, as I define myself. I was able to connect at both those levels in very deep ways with what people were saying to us, how people understood their lives, and how people understood resistance and engaged in resistance and a vision of justice. So that's one thing. The other thing I carry back, and I have lots of personal stories, but the other thing in general that I carry back is the very material experience of a settler colonial state and apartheid that emerged through our experience of
checkpoints, of the walls that Barbara talked about, of settler roads that we could not drive on, and the way that mobility was completely constrained for Palestinians and for some of us. And so a lot of those very material experiences, I think, were very key for me and for many of us, I believe, in actually understanding how institutions and state violence materialize themselves in everyday life of people, and how people learn to both understand, cope, and resist this. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Chandra. I think next is going to be Premila. Premila?
Yes. So I just want to say thanks to Rabab and everyone else who organized this. And it's really wonderful to see all of you again. You know, as I was thinking about this event today, I think what struck me about us gathering 10 years later is that when we went to Palestine 10 years ago, it was the urgency of the moment that I think led us all to the decision to go on that delegation. And I think that's even more true now. The moment is even more urgent at this particular time. Like everyone else, I came away from Palestine deeply moved by what I witnessed and the stories of people that we met there. I'm from South Africa, and I both lived in South Africa under apartheid and was very involved in the anti-apartheid movement. And I think for me, what I witnessed in Palestine was very viscerally connected to my experiences in South Africa. And it was both the horrific instances of abuse that we heard about, but also the systemic and structural ways that people were marginalized. And I think there's going to be a little bit of repetition here, but that wall that we saw in Kilkillia was incredibly powerful. And to hear the stories, a 26-foot wall that separated a family from their own land, where they had to go through a checkpoint. Sometimes it took them 2 hours to go through that checkpoint in the morning. The walls, the structures of apartheid in Palestine were designed to isolate, were designed to undermine unity, were designed to divide. It was about the diversion of water resources. It was about the theft of land. It was about ethnic cleansing. And it was very reminiscent for me of the South African passbooks, of the homeland systems that were designed to impede mobility, of the dispossession of people, of the physical segregation. But I was also thinking, and I don't know if people know this, but we just passed the 45th anniversary of the Soweto uprising in South Africa. I believe it was last week. But in that uprising 45 years ago, over 600 people were killed because of their peaceful march against Afrikaans as the language, which was the language of the oppressor. The use of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction in African schools. And that protest in 1976, in June of 1976, sparked a nationwide revolt. Within 4 months, over 160 African communities around the country were engaged in protest. And it was really, I think, a critical turning point in the anti-apartheid struggle. So I guess, one question I have is sort of where are we in the Palestinian struggle? Is this moment a turning point in the ways in which we begin to see the crumbling of Israeli apartheid? I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Premila. I believe that Anna Guevara wanted to go, was willing to go next. Please, Anna, I'm turning the microphone over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Rabab. I also wanted to extend my gratitude to you for bringing us back together, and also to my comrades for this reunion. I think we've seen each other in some way or the other before the pandemic, but it's really nice to be in gathering with all of you. I think, similar to what Barbara, Beverly, and Chandra shared, being in Palestine for me as someone who comes from the Philippines and has been involved in various movements around other authoritarian regimes, including the one Duterte that we are subjected to at this moment, really allowed me then to see the connections between the Philippines and Palestinian struggles around U.S. empire, militarism, settler colonialism, and also the resistance of the very people who are subjected to that violence. And I think there are a few images that come to mind as I think about that visit in 2011. And I think one of them is similar to what Chandra just articulated in terms of the materiality of the state violence and how they that materialize in the everyday lives of Palestinians. I mean, the level of surveillance was really palpable for me. Seeing and even going through some of the corrals that Palestinians go through every day to work and to get back home was enraging. I remember the questions at checkpoints. I remember coming from, after our visit with, at Birzeit. I remember, I remember Chandra going through the checkpoint and having her being asked to remove the journals that we, that were gifted to us and being scrutinized in terms of what those, books and journals represented. I remember the German Shepherd dogs that Beverly talked about, really these kind of very visceral experiences at various checkpoints. And also, I think for me, the collusion between the U.S. And Israeli state. There was a signpost in the Jalameh checkpoint that I remember reading, and it said, U.S. aid from the American people. The Jalameh vehicle crossing enhancement was funded by the American people through the U.S. Agency for International Development to foster greater trade and development of the area. And I think that was one of the most powerful images that stayed with me for a long time. Not only because, for me, that attested to the culpability of the U.S. state in all of this, but I also now think that that signpost could have easily been in the Philippines to reflect the enduring U.S. empire that really is sustained by militarism, the military presence of the U.S. in the country, and to this day, unfortunately, supports the authoritarian regime of Rodrigo Duterte. I also remember the trip to Hebron and passing through Palestinian homes and seeing the ways in which settlers vandalized the gates leading to the homes of Palestinians, but also how the residents, exercised their resilience and kept rebuilding around this, horror, this vandalism and violence. And I think what others have said, I remember the warmth and strength of the people we met, but also the urgency through which they shared their stories. And the trip to Sheikh Jarrah was also probably the most powerful for me, meeting the 88-year-old woman who narrated her forced displacement from her home. And also, as Barbara described, being, the proximity to that violence and, living in that periphery, and just seeing the ways that the settlers, not only took their homes, but also tagged them with, flags to kind of mark their, their occupation. And, all of that, all of those images were not just jarring, but really, truly enraging. And, in many ways, it, was not only the urgency of telling that story, but also the urgency for a call to action and a call for solidarity. And, I'm glad Beverly mentioned, that moment, because that was, the singing with a Palestinian woman, We Shall Overcome, because that was also one of the, one of the most powerful images that I came away with as we ended our trip. And I've been trying to find where I know that I took a video of that moment. And as soon as I find it, I will share, because I think that was also, for me, really what this delegation has meant. And it is, to bear witness to this horror and to also figure out what are ways that we can support and uplift and stand, to not only share these stories, but to figure out how to truly lend our intellectual energies to ending this violence and to, further to work towards Palestinian liberation. So I'm really happy to be here, and I look forward to engaging in conversations with all of you. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Anna. I just want to, we don't have time to kind of get into all the details, but the Jalamet checkpoint that you referred to, Anna, and I think other people spoke about, where Chandra was searched. I remember the booklet that the Israeli soldier, young soldier woman, recognized. She did not speak any Arabic. She did not know what it was, but it was, nor English. But she saw the picture because it was from Ad-Damir, and it had on the cover the images of Palestinian women carrying the pictures of their imprisoned children. And she was so bothered by it that she called for her. I mean, we were supposed to just go through a checkpoint, and she was so bothered. Her supervisor, there we got so delayed at the checkpoint. And it talks about the whole policing issue. But also, I want to say that was also ended up in delaying our meeting to go to Al-Fahm to meet with Sheikh Raed Salah, who was the president of the Islamic movement, which has been banned, very different from the current one that participated in the Israeli government. So just to connect the dots and so on. And the whole question of policing. I'm going to turn it over to Gina Dent, and then Gina, please go ahead next.
Oh, it's so wonderful to be with you all. Rabab, thank you for reuniting us. And I want to thank everyone who is on this live video who hosted us. We are still here for you, and we look forward to being with you again. I've been listening to everyone and all of the memories, and I want to build on two of them, things that really struck me on my visit. One has to do with my own work against prisons and the way that being in Palestine was an incredibly powerful reminder of the damage that prisons do, and realizing that everyone that we met had been involved in some way with the criminal legal system, including a 10-year-old boy who looked very unhappy during one of our meetings, was standing a little bit aside. And later on, it was explained to us that he had been incarcerated multiple times, and he was only then about 10 years old. And realizing the terrible effect that incarceration was having on very young children, and realizing how many families and communities had been affected deeply by this form of settler violence was an incredibly powerful lesson I took from that trip, including the revelatory information that Sahar Francis shared with us at the women's meeting about the work of Ad-Damir, but also about things about Israeli incarceration that I did not know. I mean, including the fact that some people were forced to be incarcerated and to pay for their own incarceration, and that the many different layering of the legal system made it almost impossible to find a way out. We also attended a meeting at An-Najah, and when asked how many people in the audience had known someone who was incarcerated, virtually everyone in the room stood up. It was a powerful rebuke to the Israeli settler state, and a powerful statement of solidarity from the people who were present. I also want to talk about our visit to Hebron, which was maybe among the most disturbing aspects of our trip. We were about to walk down a street, and we noticed the sign that let us know that only Israeli vehicles were supposed to move down that street. And we were surprised, not because we weren't aware of the segregation, but because we weren't aware of how visible that segregation would be. Many of us who had been studying and known about and been in solidarity with Palestine for many years felt that we understood what we would see when we went, but in fact, it was so much more blatant. And that made it hard to understand why the international community had not banded together to help the Palestinian resistance. When we were avoiding that road, we did what Palestinian residents in Hebron do, and we climbed the path on the side of the road to rise up and then to descend to get back to where we were intending to go. We took that road and we encountered those young children who taunted us and in fact spit on us, as they did apparently to many who were forced to climb that road. We also saw, as Anna just mentioned, signs of resistance on that road. A family whose gate had been graffitied with disparaging terms build themselves a new gate, but they posted that gate across the street in order to serve, so that the gate would serve as a reminder of the oppression that they suffered. And as we descended, we were concerned because we saw a group of young people who looked like settlers, and we were worried about what would happen when we encountered them. I believe it was Rabab who went ahead and began to speak to them. And we all anticipated what would happen. And when she returned, we were delighted to learn instead that these were Israeli young people who had come to study the problem of the occupation and had come to work for answers. And so I just wanted to end also on another kind of positive note. In addition to our observance of the strength and solidarity amongst those Palestinians we encountered everywhere, we also saw signs that there are people who are Israeli citizens, who are Jewish citizens of Israel, who are also fighting this regime. And that is a powerful reminder of the work we all need to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. I was actually wanted to, before I turn it over to Angela, I was actually thinking a lot about this because I went through the notes and I found that email that we wrote to TIF, to the International Supposed Separation Force in Hebron. And remember, they have organized for us to walk through Hebron. And then they wrote in their press release that we had a dialogue with the settlers. And actually we did not. We spoke to this young, we argued with the settlers. We spoke to this young kid, Gandhi, who was arrested, whom we actually saw again, I think in 2019. In 2018, we were there. He comes to us and said, I'm Gandhi. I'm a tall kid in the old city of Hebron. And we took a picture of him. But they wrote that we had a dialogue. We did not dialogue with the settlers. We actually spoke with young Israelis who were the seed for what became Break the Silence, which is now one of their main leader, Iran Efrati, is now one of the main organizers of the Deadly Exchange Project with the Jewish Voice for Peace. And he's actually exposing all of this stuff. And we asked them to change the press release and they never exchanged. I mean, they actually even wrote mentioning to introduce Angela. Is it really true? Is it the Angela Davis? And I remember Hala from An-Najah saying, yes, it's Angela Davis. But then they took us inside and they had this exhibition inside and so on. But then they lied in their press release and we demanded that they change the press release and they never, to my knowledge, they've never changed it. I haven't checked recently, but when I checked, they never changed it. They actually distorted what we were doing, both invisibilizing Israeli anti-Zionist Jews who are standing in solidarity with Palestine and part of the Palestinian Liberation Project, as well as making it sound as if we're okay with the settler, colonialist, racist, violent people who are taking over Palestinian land. So it was multiple ways of violences that they were doing. And part of it is maybe they were dismissing us also because we were women, feminists, I don't know. But anyway, I've been meaning to mention this. I'm going to turn it over to Angela now. So, Angela Davis.
Well, first of all, let me also say how happy I am that we're able to come together on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of our visit to Palestine. So thank you so much, Rabab, for organizing this event. Thank you for the work you did that enabled our delegation to take place. And Barbara, Ransby, also thank you for helping to initiate the events that led to our pivotal visit to Palestine. Like so many of the other participants in this program, I had been involved in efforts to support justice for Palestine for many, many years. So much so that I really thought I knew what I was going to experience on that delegation. But as so many of the other members of the delegation have pointed out, the actual materiality of that experience made us recognize how little we knew. And I just want to use my 2 minutes to say, first of all, we were all so impressed by the degree to which education constituted the center of the lives of so many Palestinians, that the illiteracy rate in Palestine is one of the lowest in the world, even given the difficulties that always present themselves, preventing people from attending school from elementary school all the way up to the postgraduate level. And we learned how during periods of attack during the Intifada, that classes continued to take place, even when they had to happen in people's homes. Even when the university was shut down, classes took place. Now, I also want to share a personal experience, which is linked to the point that Beverly made about the Palestinians' consciousness of the struggle against racism that has unfolded in North America for so long. If I am allowed to mention my own personal experience, when I was in jail in the early 1970s, awaiting trial on charges of murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy, I received messages of solidarity from all over the world. One of the most moving messages I received was a solidarity message that had been smuggled out of an Israeli prison, sent to me by Palestinian political prisoners. And serendipitously, or perhaps I should say that this was meant to happen, when we visited East Jerusalem, I met one of the political prisoners who had signed that message so many decades ago. And that seemed to symbolize the unbreakable ties of solidarity among our movements. And let me also emphasize, as Beverly, Chandra, Gina, so many others have pointed out, that the process of enforcing segregation was so unexpected, even though many of us knew that this was the case. I was not really prepared for the extent to which the structures of segregation seemed to me to be even more devastating than the segregation I experienced growing up as a child in Birmingham, Alabama. And I know Premila has talked about the connections with South Africa. And I can remember shortly after the delegation, when we returned, we learned about the movement that was being organized to challenge the segregation of the highways that are designed to provide to provide connections between one settler colony and another within occupied Palestine. And so we learn that buses and cars that Palestinians were going to ride on to protest the segregation of the highways, that they called that project Palestinian Freedom Rides, which of course was one way of acknowledging the connections between Black struggles for freedom in North America and the ongoing struggle for Palestinian freedom that we had witnessed. Finally, I think what I want to do, I think I've perhaps taken more than 2 minutes, but I just want to mention June Jordan, since our delegation was a delegation of Indigenous and women of color scholar activists, that June Jordan was really the pioneer in this respect. She's spoken out for Palestine at a time of reluctance and fear and capitulation to Zionism. So I just, want to say that her words that link Black feminism to occupied Palestine continue to resonate. I was born a Black woman, and now I am become Palestinian against the relentless laughter of evil. There is less and less living room, and where are my loved ones? It's time to make our way home.
Oh my God, Angela, you're killing me. This is amazing, because I was actually going to write in the chat. June Jordan was actually supposed to come and speak at our conference, Union of Palestinian Women's Associations in North America, but she became very sick, so she was unable to do it. And that was sort of like maybe the last message that we received from her. So it's yeah, she's been amazing. Okay, I don't want to comment now. I want to turn it over to Waz to comment on the first, and then I will take a little bit of my turn and add a couple of things.
Well, I want to express my gratitude as well, especially to Rabab and Barbara, who invited me to participate in this delegation. It was something I had wanted to do for a long time, because so much of the Palestinian experience resonates with me and what I understand of the Indigenous experience here within the United States context. And there were a few moments that hit me hard when I was visiting Palestine. And I want to go back to something that Melissa brought up at the very beginning, because our first day in the West Bank was when we visited the village of Awarta. And they had just experienced 45 days of terror, they referred to, in which their village was under siege by Israeli settlers and military. And they told us that even just a few hours before we arrived there, that settlers had set fire to their wheat crop, attempting to destroy and hurt their food production. And as I was listening to the stories and seeing the images of the settlement, it felt like I was going back in time in many ways to what I know my ancestors experienced in terms of the invasion, that physical occupation of our homeland and a place where we had roamed freely for millennia, and how their hearts broke seeing this flood of settlers into our lands. And our people went to war against the United States government and its citizens in 1862. But one of the narratives that we still fight against today in the 21st century context is this idea of perpetrating violence against innocent white settlers. And I think that the visceral nature of seeing the settlements as they're forming in Palestine just made it crystal clear to me that those civilian populations are absolutely essential to the colonization process, and that in that sense there are no innocent settlers in a colonial context, and so things that I kind of knew in my heart just became very, very real, very concrete in that sense. And I think that all of us in the United States kind of struggle with this idea that the United States has presented itself as a beacon of democracy, just as Israel has attempted to justify its extreme militarization and repression under the banner of security, portraying themselves as a righteous victim. And, they have flipped reality. They have perverted reality in that way. And I think some of those comments that I heard became so important. One of our hosts in Kakilia said, "The wall isn't about security, it's about stealing land." Land theft is a part of all of that. And I think that language of security that's employed by Israelis is about ensuring that the violence proceeds unilaterally, that Israelis can continue invading, stealing, destroying, oppressing, and colonizing while trying to minimize the impact of any defensive actions by Palestinians. And another speaker in one of the women's organizations said, Israel is not defending itself, it's defending its occupation. And we see that today in the United States context as well. The other point that I want to make, very briefly, is that at the time I kept thinking on my visit there that what I was seeing was a kind of a high-tech, modern version of the colonial project, very different in some ways than what my ancestors experienced. But I kept thinking, if we were still resisting actively, especially physically resisting the occupation of our homelands, the United States and our reservations would look very much like Palestine today. And a few years after our visit, we saw the water protectors rise up at Standing Rock in North Dakota in our context to protest the pipeline installation of the DAPL pipeline. And, I know that there was a lot of solidarity action on the part of Palestinians recognizing our struggle here in this context. And as Beverly was talking about the use of the dogs, the attack dogs, and what we saw at Standing Rock were the same kinds of methods employed, same kinds of tools employed, the use of dogs, all the barbed wire that they were unraveling, the surveillance, the things to, jam our cell phones and internet reception. When we got arrested, getting put in dog kennels and strip searched and held without being able to make phone calls or contact people from the outside. All of those same kinds of strategies were employed. So for me, when I think about my time in Palestine, it's about having the honor of bearing witness to the same kind of violence that our people face here, and wanting to just lend my voice and my heart and my energy to saying, we see that this is wrong, and we are with you, and we will always be with you.
Thank you, Waz. I wanted to just add a couple of things from my own impressions, and it's weird because here I'm Palestinian, so I'm from there, I'm from here. And so I just wanted to mention a couple of things that I thought were, in addition to all what you all have said, before we move on to the next set of questions. One is what was saying about the Palestinian woman saying we understand what colonialism is. And that was in Seminablis, the first day we arrived, and we had breakfast. And we were supposed to have only a couple of people, and then almost 40 people showed up, and all the leaders of the Palestinian women's movement in Nablus. And the woman who responded actually was Uhud Yaish, the president of the Arab Feminist Union, which has been in existence, I think, since 1929, no, 1921 or something. Anyway, and so there were. I was personally really happy to see them to all, because some of the women were actually friends of my mother, my late mother, who was quite sick and passed away the following year. But also all these people came up from Nablus on a Friday, when folks are supposed to spend time with their families, have a luxurious late breakfast. Men go to do the Jum'ah prayers and so on. I used to go with my mom to visit the cemeteries, the graves of families and so on. So it was really great that they actually took the time and came and heard. And it was a feminist delegation. So that for me was really great. The other meetings that I want to remember is the meeting at In'ash al-Usra that was organized by Rima Tarazi, who was one of the founders of In'ash al-Usra, and one of the leaders of the General Union of Palestinian Women underground, that remained underground from 1967, when the Israeli occupation started of the West Bank, Gaza, and other Arab lands, until 1993. It was completely underground. Nobody knew who was involved, who was getting into it, and so on. So Ms. Tarazi organized, and that's where we heard from Abdomir, Sahar Francis. That's where we heard from many women who came from all these organizations. And what was really beautiful about it is that this was the society that we went and we got the embroidery afterwards. And I remember it was a bit pricey. It is pricey in In'ash al-Usra. But one of the things that I do remember actually clearly was in the display that we watched, there was, in the museum that they had, there was a passport of my aunt and her husband before 1948. And she was the founder of the association. She had passed away. But I've been to the association multiple times. I've actually had not seen that particular exhibit. They keep adding to it. So it stays in my mind, as well as some images of some of the, that says the government of Palestine from 1945, some documents and so on torn up. And so that was another. The other thing I think I remember is Mad al-Kermel, the meeting which was organized and to which many feminist groups in the 48 areas in Haifa came together, including Aswat, the Palestinian lesbian feminist group, and Ghadir Shafi. I think she's actually watching now. And she actually has been very much cooperating and helping us in order to set up the Queer Liberation March on Sunday in New York. And we received a lot of stuff from Aswat, in addition to Al-Qaws that many people, I think Barbara, you spoke about that, but also everybody speaks about it everywhere. And I also think of the ways in which Palestinian articulations of feminisms were presented, whether we talk about the women in Awarta, whether we talk about the Sheikh Jarrah or Nabil Kurd, the women in Silwan, whether we talk about the men who were speaking, the Palestinian Legislative Council members, whether we're speaking about how Sheikh Ra'ad Salah actually took it very seriously, our question, and responded to it. Everywhere we went, there were so many different ways. The last thing I want to say is the meeting we had in Nablus, where the We Shall Overcome came. Because this was, to me, it was very dear to my heart. This was the meeting that was organized by An-Najah National University, and it was an open meeting. And I just looked up and saw the invitation in Arabic and in English in my emails. And it said, come. And then what happened is that Maryam al-Shakhshir is the one who started singing We Shall Overcome. Maryam al-Shakhshir and Amal al-Hanbali are the women I grew up idealizing, because they were part of Jamilat Nablus, the prisoners, the women prisoners in 1968, over 18 who were imprisoned. And so I idealized them. And then when they went out of prison, I sought them out. And Amal al-Hanbali was actually going to leave the day of out. She lives outside of Palestine, and she stayed longer to come and attend. And when Maryam al-Shakhshir held everybody's hand and knew word by word for We Shall Overcome, it was incredible. And some of us, I have to say, some of us who don't want to do kumbaya, right? So I sometimes think maybe We Shall Overcome is not like we will not be moved. It's not as radical. Few years later, in 2016, she sat at the table with Hank Jones and other former prisoners and explained why is it that she sang We Shall Overcome. She said, when we were in prison, every single time we feel that we have a very strong Israeli attack against us, we remember revolutionary songs from around the world. So We Shall Overcome in the Palestinian repertoire of resistance, in the Palestinian prison narrative, represents something about resistance, about actually solidarity, about thinking and remembering and being actually also aware of struggles elsewhere in the world. So it was, and by the way, Maryam is going to be most likely participating on the 13th. She's been speaking, she's been engaging in everything. So she's one of the, as well as many others. I mean, I'm asking everybody if they would be willing to come and speak. I don't know how we're going to be able to manage it online, but it would be really great to have them also. There were a lot of memories then. I want to turn it over now to with all your permission, to our second question, and maybe combine the second and the third together. Is what impact do you think, assess our delegation has had, and maybe connect the two together and talk about what does this mean? What does it mean to have a feminist delegation? Not only what does it mean to have a delegation, what does it really mean to have a feminist delegation? Do we really need to go to see, to speak about that? What's the power of that? And what's the power of actually specific feminist and queer liberation delegation? And what does it mean to have indigenous women of color, not just any other delegation? Some of you spoke about that, but I was thinking maybe we can connect the two together so we can share. So I don't know who would like to start. Jump in. We're not, that's for people who are watching, we are not scripting any of this. This is all on the go. We're doing it the way we were talking about during the delegation. So we could use the same order, whatever you'd like, okay? Or maybe I can, maybe start with somebody who spoke. You want to do this the same order? Like maybe have Melissa, the way we did it. It's up to you. For me, I don't.
I think we should just jump in. I think we should just talk. Okay.
Jump in and interact.
It becomes to, so let's not. Yeah?
Okay.
So I have said this, I can go, or someone else can go.
Go, Chandra, please.
Okay. So you asked about the impact, right? And you asked about why this delegation. So maybe I'll start with why this was important, right? So an indigenous and feminist of color delegation for me was actually key to what I learned in Palestine. That it was this community of women who our memories, our histories, our awareness of how we think about decolonization and justice and gender justice, right? Many of us are friends. Many of us were friends before. So we have had some of these conversations. We were able, I think, to really create a space for reflection which pushed us beyond our individual experiences of Palestine. So for me, this kind of a delegation was really crucial to what I learned, because a lot of what I learn in dialogue and conversation. Okay, so that's one. I think it was also really important to have a feminist delegation, a delegation that actually paid attention to the misogynist, patriarchal, heterosexist roots of settler colonialism and apartheid. That we actually, so it wasn't just about we need to talk to a bunch of women. We actually had an analysis that we took to Palestine and that we learned in Palestine. And I think that was really, really key. It was key to the statement that we wrote in the end. I think it's key to the kind of memories we've shared here as well. So for instance, talking about surveillance, I don't think you can understand how the surveillance works unless you have a gender analysis of how it in fact impacts differently. So those kinds of things, I think, were really important. In terms of the impact, for me, one very small thing, but very important thing, I always teach about Palestine in every single class that I teach. So there is not a single class that I have taught in the last 10 years that doesn't address Palestine. And that, I think, is important. So there's something about that I learned also about a pedagogy there, which those concrete experiences, in fact, made me understand in a more deep way and in a more significant way. This needs to happen. These connections that everyone has made to South Africa, to Black liberation struggle, to Philippines, to everywhere, those connections, I think, can be made visible so that people in the US, students in the US, actually get it. And as we've all said, these have not been easy years for people who are pro-BDS or working for Palestine. Enough people have been, gotten rid of from the academy, not gotten jobs. So all of this it's all important work. So I'll stop here. Someone else.
I will go.
Yeah.
Yes, I can relate to what you're saying, and I wanted to follow up on that, because the praxis of feminism, right, for me as the most junior among all of you, right, at the beginning, I think I may have said that at the time. I said I was so nervous to meet the people that I have seen in my books at school, right? And so for me, it was a very holistic experience, right? Like even the tensions that we had, like the negotiations, when we were so tired after spending the whole day visiting, right? And finding the significance of that experience, right? And continuing, right? We had an itinerary. So for me, two takeaways. Just related to what you just mentioned, Chandra. One, like you, I made it a point that every single class that I teach, I centered a few things, but for the sake of our conversation, I will mention two. I learned when in the trip from WAS to always acknowledge indigenous land. So I always make sure, that's what I learned, not from the Palestinian activists and people that we met, but I met from one of my co-delegation members. Right? And the other one is precisely that I always include Palestinian. As a matter of fact, I've been teaching a cultural studies class on fashion, which you would say, what does that have anything to do with, right? But believe me, there are lots of things about, Palestinians and fashion. When I was asked to teach something about graffitis, oh my God, all the wall, right? Like, and all the participation and the fact that sometimes they just last for like 24 hours. So it is amazing once you center the voices and you're intentional, there is always a connection. And I have found that super rewarding, because sometimes students who may not be open to that, you enter through a different aspect of cultural life, and then you got them right there. And that has been quite fulfilling.
So I can go, and I just want to follow up with, both Chandra and Melissa's comments, and especially about thinking about the gendered component of occupation and the gendered component of militarization, which was so visible to us, and clearly something that people articulated. But I think the other thing that I wanted to talk about is to really think about feminism, right? And the way in which feminism is often articulated here in the United States is often the Palestinian struggle is excised from that. And I think it's extremely important that we as feminist scholars, feminist activists, take a strong stand around Palestinian self-determination, and to understand that we cannot have a left or a feminist struggle without talking about Palestine. It's a critical issue. Solidarity is absolutely essential to developing a feminist agenda, and solidarity with Palestine, as well as with working class women, as well as with women who are incarcerated. It's that our understanding of feminism has to be broad, has to be intersectional, has to be transnational, has to be anti-racist, it has to have a class analysis at the center of it. And I think we all really came on this delegation with that perspective, and I think it was really, strengthened. Our analysis and our perspective on that was really strengthened during that delegation.
Well, I actually just was going to follow on the trajectory that Chandra and Melissa had started, really, and to say that before I went, I had people tell me many times how complicated it was to speak about Palestine in knowledgeable ways if you were not someone who was in Middle East studies, if you were not someone who spoke languages. It was really the trip that allowed me to realize that I not only had a responsibility to do the political work that I had been doing for a long time as an ally and as an activist, but that I had capacity as a scholar and as a teacher to introduce these materials. It was really this trip that made me realize that this narrative about how complicated everything is was really part of the story of why the resistance was constantly suppressed. And so I just wanted to say that this is I think a critical part that also comes from feminism too, the feminism that we share, which is that we don't relegate these other issues to the outside of our analysis, and that we go toward that which is the most difficult to describe and the most difficult to integrate into our analysis. And if we need to adjust our analysis if it cannot accommodate this level of complexity. And so I just want to thank everyone really for making it clear on this trip. It was a very, relatively short period of time, a very intense period of time, being in several regions and going through so many checkpoints. And also, I think people should know, not being able to make certain meetings because of the difficulty of travel and the difficulty of the checkpoints. And having experienced all of that, I not only speak from that experience when I'm teaching, but I'm also speaking and reading about things that I was intimidated to consider before at a certain level. And I think that was a gift of the trip. And I think it's a reason why others should also go on delegations and continue to do this work in a feminist context.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Thank you. And I just have to say, when you were talking earlier, Gina, it was just like so many vivid memories. I was like, why didn't I remember that? Why didn't I remember that? So I'm glad we're having this conversation together because it's kind of expanding that. But what I wanted to just also say is, sometimes, we think, and I ask this question myself a lot, there's so many hours in a day, so many days in a year. What is the best way to intervene? What is the best way to be in solidarity? And sometimes you think, well, is it a delegation? Am I just going so I can see it? And, and so I was really convinced by this delegation after the fact, more than, I'm always questioning beforehand, is this the right thing to do? But afterwards, to see the ways in which the participants in the delegation have, relied on that experience to fortify commitments. And I think particularly of, NWSA, there were numerous panels, which I think, spread the words, expanded the dialogue, engaged in debate. And then I think of our sister Rasmea Ode, who was deported in 2016. She was here, a part of our community and political family in Chicago. And, Angela and a number of people, Angela came here and really, put herself on the line to speak in defense of Rasmea, who was a political prisoner in Israel, who was a victim of sexual violence and torture when she was imprisoned and so forth. And I think so many people quoted our delegation and invoked our delegation as part of the reason that they saw the connection between coming to the defense of Hasnea and their own feminist praxis. So, so I think it does, it does make a difference. It makes a difference in us in terms of deepening our own commitment. But then we speak from experiences and we speak to other people, with a kind of, I guess, forcefulness and authenticity that we can't necessarily do if we haven't set foot on the soil, So I just wanted to share that. I'm thinking very much about her this week.
I'm going to go next because you've mentioned a whole bunch of things, actually, that first, actually, Rasmiya was one of the same batch of women who were arrested as Maryam and Amal. Rasmiya, Aisha Ode, a whole bunch of, they were arrested at the same time. So there is many connections. But I want to say that one is that many of the people here are what we call living archives in the sense that you have so much knowledge. We have so much knowledge that it's sometimes really like it really needs to be kind of every time we were in the delegation, we learned, and I want to reemphasize what everybody has said, we learned from each other. We learned a lot of, I didn't really know that Beverly, you marched in Selma. I didn't know. I learned a lot of the stuff. But also, I was proud of the way in which people in Palestine responded. And the reason I say this is because it talks about what is a delegation. A lot of times, many Palestinians tell me, and scholars say, why do you want to bring people on delegation? Why do you do delegations? And, we hear again, we come in, we speak like a microphone. We sometimes get displayed and as if we are show and tell and so on. A lot of time people they have too much things on their plate. They don't have the time. Sometimes they have to trust to say things that may get them in prison and so on. And I keep getting convinced more and more and more, not in the sense of actually go show and tell and 101 and what basically presenting people who go as innocent and then they get contaminated in the field, but actually really engaging in the real pedagogical, organic, intellectual kind of way, in the sense that we also grow. We grow ourselves and we grew. We also learn from each other. We engage with each other. We challenge each other. And we learn from the field and the field learn from us, if you want to talk about it in terms of field research and so on. But in terms of interlocutors, the people we are interacting with, it is also very important to have this reciprocal solidarity, to have this critical engagement, not just to go and say, okay, we're wonderful, everything you are saying, or people are saying to us the same thing. We are learning. So I want to say one of the things that I actually was not really much sold on NWSA before the delegation. I wasn't even there when you all cooked this particular delegation. And then I saw Gina at American Studies Association. And I had been harassing Chandra and Beverly for quite a while. When you're going to go to Palestine? When you're going to go to Palestine? And then at one point I said, you know what? Okay, you decide to go when you want to go. As in Arabic, we say, خلي المغني يغني لحاله. Let the singer sing on their own whenever they decide to do it. And then Gina reaches and she said, okay. And then Barbara emails me. And then we start actually working on this. And you all decided at an NWSA. And so I was still kind of like not really very much sold on it until we went and until we came back and until the meeting in Puerto Rico, actually, and the ways in which NWSA was also changing. And this also connects with the way NWSA was changing and shifting as we were also building the struggle for Palestine. So the presidents of NWSA, actually, and specifically the women of color presidents of NWSA, and I'm going to be very clear, if you think it's okay, it's a problem, it's a problem. But I'm very clear about that. You stood and you took positions and you fought and you made it real even after we passed the vote. You also made it, I wish Trisha was with us too in Palestine. But you made it very real. You actually realized that. When you, Barbara, when you were president, Premila, you actually made different. What NWSA was a decision, we fought for it, but you also implemented it. And the most recent ways, Barbara, all the stuff that you've done when you were president, Beverly, you enabled it to happen. And then Premila, the fact that NWSA also signed on to the Palestinian Feminist Collective Pledge. This is continuing support. And the panel you organized, Chandra, what you spoke about, Angela, everybody, all of you have been so amazing. And I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful to be part of this group. And I'm not saying it lightly. I think this is really what real solidarity is all about. We're struggling together. We show that gender and sexual justice is part of the indivisibility of justice, that justice for Palestine is part of it and it cannot be left alone. So I love you all, and I'm just so happy that we're here. So I'm gonna give the floor.
Okay, I can say a few words about the impact of the delegation. You know, we've all been talking about the ways in which this experience helped to shape our own teaching and activism. And I could talk about that as well, but I want to emphasize the fact that this was a pioneering delegation that led to so many other delegations, delegations of activists, academics, the LGBTQ delegation. And I want to try to put it in the context of the changed terrain of social justice struggle in the US. And I think that our delegation made an extremely important contribution to a trajectory that has completely transformed the way Palestinian solidarity is viewed, so that now it's virtually impossible to talk about the Black movement in the U.S. without also considering the ties with the movement for solidarity in Palestine. You know, I can remember that after Ferguson, which in many ways pointed to these close ties between the two struggles, a Black Lives Matter delegation went to Palestine. So, you know, I think it's really important to see the vast changes that have taken place on the landscape of social justice struggles in the U.S. Many of us before had dedicated ourselves to trying to guarantee that justice for Palestine would be considered an organic element of agendas for social justice, rather than something that is, you know, always considered to be marginal or of course, there were those of us who were active in various forms of social justice movement and also in Palestine, but we couldn't figure out how to put it all together. And I think that has happened. I don't want to talk too long, but I also want to talk about the ways in which this delegation helped us to broaden our conception of the nature of settler colonialism. So thank you so much, Waz, for the many conversations that we had during the course of that period, which I think had a profound impact on all of us to seriously examine the role that settler colonialism has played in shaping racism in the U.S., not only racism against indigenous people, but against other people of color as well.
I'll just jump in for a couple minutes, or not a couple minutes, just shortly. I think, just to add to what everyone has said, I think for me, the power of the delegation really is about solidifying our commitment to linking different struggles. And, I borrow a term from Barbara, political quilting, which I think we were all doing, but I think after the trip, for me, that became even more important. And so I think that's something that I really have taken away from this delegation, is how do we quilt our struggles together? How do we intervene also in different ways, so that there are different forms of intervention, whether it's, through writing, through teaching, being out on the streets, intervening in our association. So for example, the Association for Asian American Studies was the first to issue a support for BDS. And that was, I was really proud when that happened. And it continues to be something that, that we are really committed to. And also, department. So I'm, proud to be in the department that I'm in, Global Asian Studies, which, stands with Palestine, has issued solidarity statements, Gender and Women's Studies that I'm an affiliated faculty and Barbara is part of, has also issued a very strong solidarity statement. So I think just knowing that there are different ways institutionally that we can intervene, but also just grassroots ways that we can support students who are fighting and standing with them. I think that has been, for me, one of the most powerful, I think one of the impacts of being part of this delegation and learning from all of you. So I think I was also quite young, like Melissa, when I joined the delegation. So it really has been an honor to be part of all of you.
I just want to quickly, in terms of impact, remember the small group of students at Spelman College, a historically Black college for women, who formed a chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine. We are the only historically Black college in the U.S. that has a Students for Justice in Palestine chapter. And I want to just say thank you to those small group of students, including Bana Gabadian, whose parents were in the resistance, Syrian resistance. And every year we show the documentary film, Road to Apartheid, so that folk in Black spaces at historically Black colleges will include Palestine in their notions of global liberation. So I just want to thank those students. And this delegation had a huge impact on that and the statement, which we circulate everywhere.
I think did you speak in response to this? Or I think, right? I think everybody else spoke, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm wrong, tell me. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me? So, I always come from a different position because I'm, living in a place too where we're under occupation. And I just want to, with my closing comments, say that the place where I draw some level of hope, it comes from a few directions. And the first, it might not seem like a good thing, but it comes from the knowledge that industrial civilization that has been imposed on our homelands is unsustainable. It cannot last. It will not last. We're all seeing the dramatic effects of climate change. It's only going to get worse. It's an unsustainable way of being. And I come from a position, I'm anti-colonial, I'm anti-capitalist, I'm anti-industrial civilization, and I'm anti-empire. And one thing we know about empires is that all empires collapse, all of them. And the U.S. will be no exception. And I honestly believe that when it falls, Israel will fall as well. And that, for me, is a source of hope and inspiration.
Thank you, Waz. I just wanted to say, since Ayoka did not join us, one of the things that if she was with us, she would say, Alhamdulillah. If you remember, when we were in Dheisha, because she's also an artist, she saw all the graffiti, all the paintings. I remember in Dheisha also, there was one of the murals in Ibda that had the poetry of Samih al-Qasim, Enemy of the Sun, the whole poetry that was found in George Jackson's cell when he was killed. And people thought that George Jackson had written it, and he hadn't. He was writing it as people do in prison to pass it from one cell to the other, as prisoners do, Palestinian prisoners do also. So if Ayoka was with us, she would mention Alhamdulillah. Because I remember when we were in Nablus and we had that open meeting on June 21st, Ayoka got up and she said, somebody gave her, a Palestinian gave her Alhamdulillah. And that is, by the way, I think you, Angela, at one point somebody gave you a map, but she kept talking about Handala, and Handala, it's very, very interesting because the child that is always back to the people because waiting for justice, and the child, the refugee without shoes, which also connects with the San Jose, the athletes who stood in the Olympics and refused to wear shoes to protest the centuries of repression and black and to speak for black liberation with their fists. And so I would say, if she were with us, she would actually talk about the figures. So I wanted to just make sure that she is present with us, as Handala is present with us, as everybody else is present with us. There was one question that says that what can we do? Oh, and I wanted to also say one thing is I'm personally very grateful and very appreciative of all of you who has stood by me in the many battles that I've been confronted to. So it's not over, so don't relax. But I'm very appreciative of each of you individually as well as in WSA and the various spaces that we're in. There was a question that says, how do we combat the violent Israeli occupation and horrendous mistreatment of the Palestinian people? So we spoke about what the statement, we translated the statement to multiple languages. It's been all over the place and so on. So given that we're 10 years later, and I think Barbara mentioned it, everybody mentioned it, what would you, if people would like to actually address that, and then invite people to join us on the 13th of July. But go ahead. I put people on the spot, Barbara.
You're putting me on the spot?
Yeah, because you said we cannot just talk about what happened 10 years ago. We're also, I mean, everybody spoke about it.
Yeah. But I'll try to give some examples of how we have not just talked about it. But I think, talking about it is important. I think there's, as we understand, part of the way in which Palestine is exceptionalized out of a lot of progressive dialogues is through censorship, is through insisting that we not bring it up, we not add it to the list, we not articulate the truths that we have witnessed and know about. So I think breaking silences, is important. Solidarity statements are important. Delegations are important. So I mean, so all of these things that we have been ongoing, I also want to speak to, part of the reason we went is also struggles that are going on here. So a lot has happened in 10 years. Angela invoked Ferguson, and, we've seen the largest series of protests in this country ever. 26 million people in the street around the police murder of George Floyd, people in the streets around the Me Too movement and the women's marches. And I mean, a whole variety of angles of society, and people, getting more and more, militant in the climate justice movement and linking it to a variety of other issues. So, Waz mentioned Standing Rock, which was so inspiring. And so I think situating the struggle for justice in Palestine in these on the ground struggles where we are in the streets, we're signing petitions, but we're also putting our bodies on the line and not just being academics. So all of that's important. And I think all of us do it and should continue to do it.
So we have 1 minute, but we can maybe take 2-3 minutes more in order for us to stick to the time. If anybody else would like to address this question, what could people do?
I think that's a good ending.
Okay, so just be in the street. Come join us on the 13th. Teach, educate, go on delegation,
exactly.
organize for the freedom, dignity, humanity, justice for all. Justice for Palestine is part and parcel of the visibility of justice. We're not separate. We're part of this. We struggle wherever we're called upon. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our amazing audience. Lots of love and solidarity. The struggle continues.